this was a bad year.
Yeah.
This is a year you lose your job over. So you beat Furman, come out starting the year off strong, beating Furman. You come off of a decent 97 year. Like I said, they almost won a couple of good games, but had a conference record of 1-7, only beating Maryland. Went 3-8 overall, finished 81st in a league with 112 teams. So 81st overall, 3-8 overall record. Schedule, let's look at the schedule here. You've got Furman, they won, lost to Virginia Tech, lost to number 10 Virginia, lost to Wake Forest, lost to North Carolina, win against Maryland, lost to number 6 Florida State. Got zeroed out against Florida State and Virginia Tech, by the way. Lost to Duke by 5. Lost to North Carolina State. Lost to Georgia Tech 22. And then at the end of the year, put a bow on it and beat South Carolina to finish off strong with a 3-8 record. So I feel like you might know where I'm going with my best win.
Yeah. I'm probably the same place I'm going to be.
So there's not very many wins to choose from. I'm not choosing Maryland, and I'm definitely not choosing Furman. So I'm going to choose South Carolina, beating 28-19. I don't have any notes on this game at all, but I do have notes that they had solid linebacker play. I wanted to give props to O.J. Childress again, Raheem Abdullah, and what's the other guy's name? Dingle. I want to give props to those guys because they played their hearts out for the Tigers during these years, and they were some pretty stout guys. Antoine Edwards, still a great player, best defensive back in the country, they said during the Carolina game that I watched. So he was a pretty stout guy. Let's just put it that much. As far as offense, Brandon Streeter, and he'll make fun of himself if you talk to him. Brandon Streeter, 13 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. This, as Woodrow Dantzler is getting started. So, talk about Tommy West. He recruited Woody Dantzler. Guess who else he recruited? Rod Gardner. Yeah. The Catch, too. He recruited those two guys. Yep. They came to Clemson in part because of Tommy West, which is crazy to say. Anthony Simmons, they were talking about. I mean, these guys that started in 95, freshmen, 95, 96, 97, that's Tommy West guys that ended up going on into the pros. So a lot of guys to give some props to. Travis Zachary comes around this time, but doesn't have – I don't think Travis Zachary ends up being near as good as a Priester was. But definitely a serviceable running back for sure. 4 yards average, and he could catch the ball too out of the backfield, 9.6 yards per reception there. But Antoine Edwards is who I'm giving as my overall defensive player. Offense, I really didn't put this, but I'm going to put Wofford in this case because he was really, I feel like, their best wide receiver at that time. Mal Lawyer was good too, but I'm going to give it to Wofford.
Did you give us a worse loss there that year?
So worst loss, I did not, but I read an article. So you can't find articles about this stuff. Really, if you look on ESPN, box scores don't really start till 2003. So it's crazy. You got these videos. Thank goodness for Tiger TV on YouTube. But worst loss, Virginia Tech. I found an article from '98 from a Virginia Tech writer, and the way he writes, Hokie fans were just as surprised as Clemson fans, because Clemson fans were coming in thinking, this is a make or break year for Tommy West. This is going to be, they were excited about it. They were ready to go. They felt like they had a good defense. And, Brandon Streeter was somebody they felt like that was a good passer and good pocket passer guy. He ended up having a lot of interceptions, unfortunately. But they came out and beat them 37-0. And it was the first game at home, first big game of the year at home. They had another game at home against, I guess, Furman or Western Carolina or somebody. Let me see before they had Furman. So they played Furman a lot back then. But first big game of the year and this is when Virginia Tech's in the Big East, by the way, but 37-0. Hokie fans were just as shocked as Clemson fans that it was such a blowout. I had some stats here. So Streeter, Clemson as a whole against Virginia Tech that game, 31 rushing yards on 31 carries. Ooh. Streeter finished with 4 interceptions. Ooh. He's a great coach. But yeah, so I give the Virginia Tech game the worst loss, best win, South Carolina.
That's fair. Look, Clemson did not have any wins to choose from that year, and that's why I went with South Carolina as well. I mean, they just beat nobody good, plain and simple. Worst loss, I actually gave them at home versus Wake. They lost 29-19. Wake was a bad team. They were 3-8. And I mean, again, it's a home loss to Wake Forest. It just doesn't sound good at all. Honorable mention, I went with Virginia Tech, like you said, 37-0. But Virginia Tech, good team that year. They went 9-3, so that's why I didn't make that the worst loss. Best player on offense, I'm going to agree with you here. Brian Wofford, 35 catches for 535 yards, 5 touchdowns, and he did have a rush for 18 yards as well. And what's funny is I said in my notes, Streeter did okay, but he had about 50% completion. The 13 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. I got him confused with Nealon Green as far as touchdown to interceptions that I was talking about. But what we really need to do is get him on the show and talk about his rushing yards that season, because he had 44 carries for negative 10 yards. Okay. So we're going to, and I think we both know most of those were probably not actual rushing plays, but still, we're going to need to talk to him about that, get him on here and have a few laughs about that for sure. Plus, best player on defense, I went with you as well, Antoine Edwards with his 2 interceptions. One of our good players as well, great player of that era. So I'm all with you. We kind of agreed on most of this stuff except for the worst loss, and your loss was in my honorable mention. So I'm with you kind of across the board there in his last season.
It's hard to get. You're not going to get a coach as they're the coach. So we'll have to wait till he retires. We'll have to keep doing the show till he retires. He's never going to come on the show.
Oh, come on, you have that kind of clout.
He's never going to come on the show until he retires. Let's just put it that way. But I didn't even see this. 44 for -10. So every time he tried to rush the ball, it was 0.2 of a yard backwards. But somehow he has a touchdown. So there was one rushing attempt in there that was good. Now I want to know about that good rushing attempt. That's the question. Yeah. Let's see if I can dig into this here. So rushing touchdown. Okay, his one rushing touchdown that year. So he had 2 rushing touchdowns actually. In 97, Allen, he had four attempts for 28 yards, 7 yards per attempt, and 1 touchdown. So 97, he was way better of a rusher. 96, he had a touchdown. There's no way I'm going to get per game back then. It's going to take me forever. I'm backing out. I'm backing out. I'm going to get lost in the tunnel here in the void. But yeah, so Brandon Streeter, we love him. He's a great coach of quarterbacks. He's a great offensive coordinator too, but maybe he'll get his shot. But I would say that as a quarterback, let's just say
he doesn't need to be coaching the running backs, is what you're saying.
Let's just say I'm glad Woody Dantzler was recruited, because we both love Woody Dantzler a lot. Yeah. So again, 1998, another year that the Braves were doing good. Yeah. But I believe they lost to the Yankees that year. So unfortunately, I think that was the year that they finally ticked off David Justice and he left too, or maybe something like that. But anyway, so that's pretty much it. That's the end of the Tommy West era. So one final note, Tommy West era, unless you have some too, but final note for me is, as I'm watching the Carolina game in 98, I hear the fact that the ESPN guys intro the game, and they said, we need to talk about the head coaches because there's some controversy or there's some drama going on because Clemson fired head coach Tommy West on Wednesday. And I'm like, okay, well, who's the interim coach? No, he's at the top of the hill rubbing the rock, about to run down the hill, Al. He got fired on Wednesday, and they let him coach on Saturday. And I asked Mark Childress about this. I said, do you remember this? Like, when do you ever keep working
right
after being fired? And Mark was like, he didn't feel like it was a big deal back then. He felt like back then it was just like you kind of work out your contract kind of thing. Yeah. And I'm like, that's got to be so awkward. Now, I'm watching the game, and Tommy West is like in great spirits. He's just smiling, And I also read somewhere where at this point, when Tommy West was hired, going back to when he was hired, Clemson was still paying Danny Ford. They were still paying Ken Hatfield. And then they had just started have to pay Tommy West. So they're having to pay 3 coaches when this guy started.
Yeah.
Here he is getting fired on a Wednesday and still coaching for the team on a Saturday. And Tim Beret had a comment about him that I read somewhere. And he said that Tommy West was one of the guys that wanted the Clemson job more than anything. He loved Clemson. He loved the area. So much respect for Tommy West. I know a lot of people are kind of wishy-washy on him. Some people love him. Some people hate him. But, I think he did the best he could do. Back then, you really didn't see the spread offense. So you can't really blame him for sticking to that I formation pro style. But he could recruit. He recruited some pretty good players. Just couldn't put it all together on the field. Like I said, some of the big games that were close were, he lost. And then some, like we talk about Tommy West years. Some of those games that you're like, man, why did he lose to this team? They lost to him. So just very interesting. Still back in those years where it was very, very important to win against South Carolina. And he seemed to, kind of do that every other year. It was back then, the joke was the away team will win. No matter what, because it was always the away team in the Carolina-Clemson game that would win the game. But anyways, so I thought it was interesting that he kept playing. Another interesting note, Brad Scott was the coach for the Gamecocks. He got fired after that game too. So now Brad Scott ended up becoming the coach for the tight ends of Clemson the very next year. And then I believe Tommy West went on to be a coordinator for Memphis. And then was the head coach for Memphis and brought him to 6 bowl games in a row, I believe. So he did well for Memphis there. But that's all I got for 98 and Tommy West.
Yeah, a lot of people give Tommy West a lot of flack. You should have seen some of the faces that when I was telling some people what we were talking about this week. And I got to tell you, when I was going through and looking at everything, it's like, look, it wasn't really as bad as everybody thought. It was one bad year, really. It was one bad year in mediocrity. Okay, and we've had plenty of that over the years. It's just bad when you're comparing it to the Danny Fords and the Dabo Sweeneys. It's just bad for him that he came a couple of coaches right after Danny Ford. He had that first year, rebuilding year, 5-6. Okay, no big deal. And then his problem was he made the jump from 5-6 to 8-4. Okay, and that's a pretty solid season. But then he went 7-5, and then he went 7-5 again, and then he had the disastrous season at 3-8. Okay, you get that acclimation period where people give you a year or two to kind of get going. But he went on a slow downward trend and then dropped off the face of the cliff. And the problem was he hadn't built up any real collateral to get him anywhere, to kind of hold him over and kind of, let him have another year and see if he could get back on track. And so they just kind of, parted ways and went on to the next guy. So, look, it's kind of, I don't think everything is as bad as everybody makes it seem with Tommy West, but it obviously was not where they wanted it to be. And hey, we're in much greener pastures right now. So I will take it and run with it, what we got going on.